The morning of Tuesday, 11th September 2001, began like any other for millions of people across the United States, but it would end as one of the most infamous dates in modern history. In a meticulously coordinated act of terrorism, 19 men affiliated with the extremist group Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 commercial passenger airplanes. Their mission was to turn these symbols of modern travel into devastating weapons aimed at iconic American landmarks. The scale and audacity of the plot were, honestly, unprecedented, designed to inflict maximum casualties and sow terror on a global stage, forever altering the world's perception of security and vulnerability in the 21st century. It was, without doubt, a moment that stopped the world in its tracks. The first signs of the horror to unfold came at 8:46 a.m. Eastern Time, when American Airlines Flight 11 was deliberately flown into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. At first, many onlookers and news reporters speculated it was a tragic accident. However, that illusion was shattered just 17 minutes later, when United Airlines Flight 175 crashed into the South Tower. The ensuing fires burned with such intensity that the steel structures of both skyscrapers, marvels of modern engineering, were catastrophically weakened. Within 2 hours, both of the iconic Twin Towers had collapsed into a cloud of dust and debris, an event broadcast live to a horrified global audience. While New York was reeling from this unimaginable assault, the attack was not yet over. A third hijacked plane, American Airlines Flight 77, was crashed into the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia, the very headquarters of the United States Department of Defense. This strike on the nation's military nerve center was a direct and symbolic blow against American power. Meanwhile, a fourth plane, United Airlines Flight 93, was also under the control of terrorists. It is widely believed that its intended target was another significant building in Washington, D.C., possibly the U.S. Capitol building or the White House, a strike that would have further crippled the nation's leadership. The fate of Flight 93, however, stands as a testament to extraordinary courage in the face of certain death. Passengers and crew members, having learned of the other attacks through phone calls with loved ones, made the heroic decision to fight back against their hijackers. Their struggle for control of the aircraft ultimately caused it to crash into a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, far from its intended target. While all on board perished, their actions undoubtedly saved countless other lives on the ground. The final death toll from that terrible day was staggering. 2,977 innocent people were killed, marking it as the deadliest terrorist attack in human history. The mastermind behind this devastatingly complex operation was Osama bin Laden, a name that would become really synonymous with global terrorism. Born in 1957 in Saudi Arabia to a wealthy and influential family with close ties to the Saudi monarchy, bin Laden's early life was one of privilege. His father was a construction magnate who had amassed a vast fortune. Bin Laden was raised as a devout Wahhabi Muslim, and in his youth, he traveled to Afghanistan in the 1980s to join the Mujahideen, the Islamic warriors fighting against the Soviet Union's invasion. It was here, amidst the crucible of war, that his radical ideology and military skills were forged, and his global network began to take shape. During the war against the Soviets, bin Laden used his family's wealth and connections to fund and organize volunteer fighters, earning a reputation as a charismatic and effective leader. It was during this period that he co-founded Al-Qaeda, which translates as the base, in 1988. Initially, the group's purpose was to serve as a register for the Arab fighters who had traveled to Afghanistan, but it soon evolved into a far more sinister organization. After the Soviet withdrawal, Al-Qaeda transformed into a stateless international network of Islamist extremists, dedicated to waging a global holy war, or jihad, against what it perceived as the enemies of Islam. After the Gulf War, in 1991, bin Laden's relationship with his home country of Saudi Arabia soured dramatically. He was enraged that the Saudi royal family had allowed Western military forces, particularly those from the United States, to be stationed on Saudi soil, the land of Islam's 2 holiest sites, Mecca and Medina. He saw this as a profound betrayal and a desecration of sacred ground. his increasingly vocal and radical opposition to both the Saudi regime and its American allies led to his expulsion from the country. He eventually found sanctuary first in Sudan and later in Afghanistan, where he was harbored by the ruling Taliban regime. From his base in Afghanistan, bin Laden began to orchestrate a series of deadly attacks against American targets throughout the 1990s, including the bombings of US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998. He issued public declarations of war, or fatwas, calling on Muslims worldwide to kill Americans, both military and civilian, wherever they could be found. He saw the United States as the primary obstacle to his ultimate goal, the overthrow of what he considered corrupt, Western-backed Middle Eastern governments and the establishment of a pan-Islamic caliphate governed by a strict interpretation of Sharia law. The 9/11 attacks were the horrifying culmination of this long-held ambition. In his various letters and video messages, Osama bin Laden clearly articulated a set of specific grievances that he claimed motivated his war against the United States. Foremost among these was the continued presence of American military troops in Saudi Arabia. Following Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in 1990, the Saudi government invited US forces to establish bases in the kingdom to protect it from potential Iraqi aggression. For bin Laden, this was an unforgivable act. He viewed the presence of non-Muslim soldiers in the land of the two holy mosques as a defilement of Islam's most sacred territory, an occupation by infidel crusaders that demanded a violent response to purify the land. A second major justification for his attacks was the unwavering American support for the State of Israel. Bin Laden and al-Qaeda viewed the existence of Israel as an injustice against the Palestinian people and the wider Muslim world. He frequently condemned the United States for providing billions of dollars in military and financial aid to Israel, which he believed enabled what he termed the oppression and occupation of Palestinian lands. In his letter to America in 2002, he explicitly stated that the creation of Israel was a crime that must be erased, and he held the US directly responsible for supporting this state of affairs, making it a legitimate target for retribution. Furthermore, bin Laden repeatedly cited the actions of the United States against Iraq as a key reason for his hostility. Following the 1991 Gulf War, the US led the international community in imposing strict economic sanctions on Iraq, which were intended to pressure Saddam Hussein's regime. However, these sanctions had a devastating impact on the Iraqi civilian population, leading to widespread suffering and hundreds of thousands of deaths, many of them children. Bin Laden portrayed this as a cruel war against the Iraqi people and used the harrowing images of its effects as a powerful propaganda tool to recruit followers and justify violence against the nation he held responsible. Ultimately, these specific grievances were part of a broader strategic goal. Bin Laden believed that by launching spectacular attacks like those on 9/11, he could provoke the United States into a series of long, costly and unwinnable wars in the Muslim world. He hoped this would drain America's economic and military resources, diminish its global influence and expose its vulnerabilities. At the same time, he aimed to rally Muslims to his cause, positioning himself as a defender of the faith against a foreign aggressor. His strategy was to bleed the superpower dry, both financially and morally, and in doing so galvanize a global movement that would eventually triumph. The impact of the 9/11 attacks was immediate, profound and far-reaching, fundamentally reshaping American foreign policy and global geopolitics. In the immediate aftermath, a wave of shock, grief and patriotism swept across the United States. President George W. Bush declared a global war on terror, a new kind of conflict against a diffuse, non-state enemy. Less than a month after the attacks, the US and its allies launched a military invasion of Afghanistan to dismantle al-Qaeda and overthrow the Taliban regime that had provided them with a safe haven. This marked the beginning of what would become America's longest war, a conflict with consequences that are still unfolding today. The attacks also ushered in a new era of security and surveillance, both at home and abroad. Air travel was transformed overnight with the creation of new government agencies like the Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, and the implementation of stringent security measures that are now a routine part of flying. Domestically, controversial legislation like the Patriot Act was passed, granting the government expanded surveillance powers in the name of national security, sparking a long and ongoing debate about the proper balance between liberty and safety. The world, in many ways, became a less open and more suspicious place, as nations grappled with the threat of transnational terrorism. The hunt for Osama bin Laden became a central focus of the war on terror, a decade-long manhunt that finally concluded on 2nd May 2011. In a daring raid on a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, a team of US Navy SEALs killed the al-Qaeda leader, bringing a sense of closure to many, particularly the families of the victims. While his death dealt a significant blow to al-Qaeda's leadership and prestige, it did not extinguish the ideology he espoused. The organization has since fractured, but its affiliates and other extremist groups inspired by its example continue to operate in various parts of the world, particularly in Africa and the Middle East. More than 2 decades later, the legacy of 9/11 continues to cast a long shadow. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, launched in its wake, have cost trillions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of lives, reshaping the political map of the Middle East in unpredictable ways. The attacks are memorialized in museums and monuments, serving as a solemn reminder of the lives lost and the heroism of the first responders. For an entire generation that has grown up in a post-9/11 world, heightened security, geopolitical instability, and the persistent threat of terrorism have become a normalized part of life, a permanent inheritance from that single terrible September morning.